very well behaved. It's very quiet. This seems to be the pattern for all these talks. I always come out and everyone's sitting here very, very quiet. It's not like this on a Sunday. So, good evening, everyone, and a really warm welcome to Ipswich Minster, to those of you here in church, but also those joining us online for this, the 12th and penultimate instalment of our A Church for England series. Throughout this series, we have been seeking to create a space in which we can explore what a good Church of England should look like for the nation it serves, by engaging with some of the most vital and pressing issues of our time. Tonight we are deeply honoured to welcome our speaker, the very Reverend Dr. Mark Oakley, Dean of Southwark, who will be reflecting on what a good Church of England should look like for the imagination of England. And Mark, it is hard to imagine a more fitting voice to help us explore that question than yours. So by way of introduction, Dr. Oakley has been Dean of Southwark since 2019, presiding over a cathedral set at the heart of our nation's capital. Before that, he served as Dean of St John's College in Cambridge, and prior to that ministered in parishes, colleges and cathedrals both in the UK and in Europe. He was once even a bishop's chaplain, so there is hope for me yet. Throughout his ministry, Mark has shown a deep attentiveness to how faith is lived, spoken and imagined in the public square. Many of you will know Mark as an exceptional writer, and it is through his writings and later his counsel and now his friendship that I was and continue to be able to make sense of the Christian faith in my own life and indeed of my own vocation within the church. All of which is to say that Mark is someone not only of extraordinary gift but also of extraordinary heart. Particularly relevant to our theme this evening, he is a priest who has consistently reminded the church that imagination is not an optional extra for faith, but one of its essential organs. In its ministry, in word and deed, invites us to resist both cynicism and easy answers, and instead to cultivate a faith that is spacious, humane, and hospitable to mystery. At a time when institutions are often mistrusted, language is frequently impoverished, and hope can feel fragile, the question of how the church nurtures imagination, moral, spiritual, and poetic, feels not only timely, but urgent. Mark, we are deeply grateful for you travelling all the way out to the wilds of Ipswich tonight. We are so looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Please would we all give Mark a really, really warm welcome.
Well, thank you very much for such a kind and gracious invitation. The only way is down from there, to be honest, but it's very good to be here, and I'm always more likely to say something a little bit more provocative when I'm not back at my own place, so let's see what happens. I want to start by doing something a little bit unusual, and I hope you'll bear with me. There is a point to it. But I want to be a bit personal. You've just been personal. I was very moved by what you said. Thank you, Tom. But I want to just very briefly tell you about my mother. I was brought up as a child by my grandparents in Shropshire. Shropshire born, Shropshire bred, strong in the body, thick in the head. That's what they say. And I was brought up by my grandparents. My grandmother has only recently died at the age of 102. And as a child, my parents divorced, so I never got to know my mother because my father got custody. And so I grew up as a boy always saying to people that I didn't have a mother. This was my answer when people would always ask where my mother was. And I used to find preaching on Mother's Day, Mothering Sunday, quite difficult, even until very recently, actually. But of course, as I grew up, I wondered why a mother had let her child go. When I asked my father, when I was 7, he said, well, she said, I'll have the car and you can have him. Well, I heard that and I remembered it, and I remembered it all my life. I grew up believing that, all that goes with that, but also as I grew up, I came to see my father a bit more clearly. He and I parted company many years ago. He hated the fact that I became a priest, couldn't stand it. Then, just 3 years ago, my mother got in touch with me. Would I meet her? And I sat there in a chaos of emotion, but yes, I said I would. Where your fear is, there is your task. So I set off to the Midlands, and one cold winter's day I rang her doorbell and we spent 3 hours talking. I knew nothing about her, but I discovered she'd been following me all my life without me knowing. She knew where I'd been, what I'd done. She'd even come to see me in a school play once. She said she was proud of me, and that as she'd had dementia diagnosed, she wanted me to hear her story before it disappeared. And her lovely husband held her hand, and this isn't the place or time to recount all the time together, but it is enough to say perhaps that what with her serious postnatal depression, an attempt to end her own life, a husband keen to show that she wasn't stable, he won the court order, and her life was severed from mine. And as I sat there listening to her speak, all that I'd ever been told, all that I'd ever taken for granted, all the narrative I'd been repeating through my life, it all was completely shaken up. And I saw that a new story had to be born in me. I had to see my mother in very different eyes. I even had to understand myself differently, because I discovered she had never preferred a car to me. In fact, she said that as she left the house for the last time, her heart shattered into pieces. So this story that was gently being told to me with just a sense of her memories leaving harbour was changing me. And I went home, like it says of those wise men, by a very different road. She had at last been able to give me something loving, the truth. And all I can say is, and it's an image I often use, a little hard full stop felt as if it was turning into a comma in me. Why do I begin with that story? Well, basically the story you live in will be the story you live out. If you are trapped in a particular restrictive story, a narrative that you and everybody around you is trying to uphold, well, you will start living out that story in your behaviours, in your thinking, and so on. And yet, if you break out of that story and a new story begins, as I say, some comma can come into your life, a new chapter, a beginning. You have to reassess. And I've always understood the Christian faith as being an invitation to inhabit a different story than the one that we're often living in and that we think is reality. We've just been celebrating, as you know, in the Christian church, the baptism of Jesus. And I think you get a very strong sense of this. If you remember, Jesus comes along to the Jordan, he gets pushed down in the water, and all you can hear when you're underwater, as you know, don't try it at home in the bath, but all you can hear is a heartbeat. And you hear you, that little unique gift that's called you. And then you are pulled up out of the water like Jesus, and you have to take a deep breath. And then we're told that he hears a voice from heaven, and it says, I love you to bits. You're my child. And in the Gospels, particularly Mark's Gospel, Jesus is almost still wet. And he goes out into the desert. And he's heard now the one voice that matters in life. The one voice that matters. You're lovable, and I love you. And you're mine. He goes out into the desert, and what happens is other voices come at him from all over the place. And now he has to learn to live up to that one voice that matters and not live down to all these other voices. And today we have lots of those voices. They're all over the place. Adverts. You're too fat. You're too thin. You don't have the right car. You're not eating the right stuff. You're not voting for the right people. All these voices come at us, and we can start living down to their story. We start to inhabit their story. And of course, if you're listening to the adverts, if you're watching your social media, if you're a young child growing up with all these voices, what happens is you often end up believing you are not lovable, because you start leading an enviable life rather than a good life. Your life just becomes a life of envy and wannabe. And of course, we're not perfect, so we're never going to be. So, living up to the voice that matters, when Jesus was able to do that at last, then he was ready for his ministry. Now, the Christian church tries to remind us all the time of the story that matters. So I believe, and those of you who know anything about anything I've ever said will know that I often repeat that when people come in here, when they come into a place of worship, you have walked into, I believe, a poem. You are now inhabiting a poem of Christian faith. A poem because, we can talk about this a little bit more, I think that for the person of faith, our language is poetic. Our native language is poetic. And you only need to look for a little moment at what happens when you do come in here to an act of worship to see that it is just poetry in motion. So the first thing you probably do, I've never been to a service here, but I'm going to guess that one of the first things people do is to stand up and sing a poem. It's called a hymn. You might hear another old poem called a psalm a bit later. You'll be listening to prayers, to readings, all of which are poetic, full of figurative imagery, non-literal expressions, because when it comes to God, all we've got is a language that's had to go to the gym, a language that's had to be acrobatic and stretch itself as far as it can. And so you are living in this poem that is beautiful and different from the story of the high street. Very different. But we forget it, and we come in here with our ears tuned as if we're listening to the BBC. We come in with our little Google ears, our little BBC ears, expecting the news, expecting facts and figures and information. But what happens when you come in here is you're not going to be given a language of information, you're going to be given a language of formation. You're going to be given a language to help you become. Because you all have a project going on, and it only ends in this life, at your last breath, of becoming. God's given you the gift of being, and you give back your becoming, who you become. So we need a language that helps us form. to change, to grow. This is a school for loving a bit better. And because we need these stretches of the soul, stretches of the mind, sometimes that language is difficult. But let me tell you that the last thing you are when you're in love is a literalist. If you read what you wrote when you were last in love with somebody, it's often really embarrassing because you're writing all these sort of words that are trying to do justice to this passion you're feeling for somebody. And if poetry is the language of love, then it must be the language of the church, where we are seeking to love God and love our neighbour. So we are not literalists in the Christian church. Truth is far too important to be merely literalistic with. The way I used to annoy students is I used to say that fundamentalism is to Christianity what paint by numbers is to art. We need a language, we need also a drama, a ritualization of the things that matter. That's the other thing that human beings know, that anything that matters in your life, we tend to develop rituals around it. We don't remember it because we're so used to them, but if you love somebody, you've probably kissed them. If you like somebody, you've probably put your hand out and grabbed theirs and gone like that. It's all very odd. But we ritualize these things. If you get married, you stand and you put rings on your fingers. It's a bit strange too. But they're important. They are ways in which we are symbolizing and ritualizing the deepest things that matter to our hearts. And the church knows this. We call them sacraments, sacramentals. This is love, as it were, in poetic action, on display. Love never sits up a corner reading a book. Love is always trying to show itself a little bit more. And this is what the sacraments are doing. So for me, any church that is not being imaginative in its use of language, not being imaginative in its gestures and its drama, is failing. Because we need, and I'm not saying we need theatre, I'm saying we need to be brought back to these things that do ultimately matter. Because, and it's urgent, there are a lot of people out there at the moment who are defining the story we live in. And as you know, and you only need to look at the news at the moment, the story of the world that is being presented by very influential people, by the way, I have to say, who are often full of high self-esteem with very low self-awareness, which is a very dangerous coupling. But these people are trying to get us to understand this world as a sort of playpen in which we act out some sort of deadly warfare of the best versus the rest. That it is about being great, but not defining what greatness actually is. Jesus was very clear about what greatness meant, and it's not colonialism takeovers. It is not becoming a greater power. But this is the story that is becoming more and more visible and audible and influential. And we hear it also in the way that anybody who doesn't agree with this is shunned, projected onto, becomes a scapegoat. And we pick vulnerable people to point to so that nobody looks at what we're doing. It's the whole human tactic. And this is very destructive. It's very destructive. This is not love God, love your neighbour. Traditionally, what the church has done is to remind you every time you come into a church or into a worship of that story that does matter. This is a story about human life being a gift. It is a story about human life being about relationship, of solidarity with those who are most vulnerable, of learning to be attentive, of listening between lines, of learning gratitude. These things are not in so much of the world narrative at the moment. This new world order, it's being called, I see in the big conferences across the world, a new world order. It's not a very nice world order that's being spoken about. And one of the things that the church has always done is to bring us back to our senses is it tells the story. And one of the ways it does it at the Eucharist is the priest stands there just before you take the bread and wine, in which Jesus says, remember me, which also means remember, put yourselves back together. Remember yourselves as you remember me. And the Eucharistic prayer is basically the priest praying to God, and as he or she does so, reminding the people of the great story that we are now part of. If you go to evening prayer, every day of the year, the song of another mother who had a story to tell, Mary, is at the heart of it, the Magnificat. And here she reminds us that revelation does mean re-evaluation. That revelation means a retake, a rethink, a refresh on the whole darn story that you think you're living out. She puts the, if I can put it this way, she puts the odd back into God. She puts the humane back into human. She talks, if you remember the words of the Magnificat, she sings out in praise of holiness, and she exposes the proud and the powerful. She laughs at the way they became like that. She laughs at the emptiness of riches and the power that they can have over us if we let them. And Mary sings this out, this song, and we, every day in the church's year, are asked to sing it with her, recalling us back to our homeland, making sure that we are Christian. Because, just because you're in a garage doesn't mean you're a car. Just because you're in here doesn't mean you're a Christian. Just which story are you telling yourself is true, really? And so Mary's story is told and retold and retold, and we sing it with her. And that song, I believed, of hers was picked up later by her son. And when he goes to the mountain of the Beatitude, it's almost as if he picks up the harmonies, the rhythms of that, and spells this out for us all. So he says that actually, no matter what's being said out there, if you want to know who's really blessed, well, it's those who know their fragility, those who live with some loss, those whose ego has not taken over, those who've got some mercy in their heart, those who believe there is something called righteousness and justice, those who want to make peace, and those who get put down or even injured or laughed at because they believe this to be true and really important. And then, of course, when he was asked, okay, but what's the most important thing of all? He says, love. Love with everything you have. Love God. Love your neighbour. That's the refrain of the song. And just in the way that my mother told me a story I'd never heard, which changed my self-perception, changed the way I had to see so much of my past. So the song of Mary, so the teachings of Jesus, so the liturgies of the church are always asking us to come back to the real voice from heaven, to the story that is true, and live in it, and then take it out. It's not a selfish story. It's called good news, and everything that's good wants to be shared. We can talk a little bit about how this practically can develop into imaginative ways. I have a few thoughts about that, but I want to end, because I've been asked to keep to 30 minutes and I'm very obedient. I just want to end with a little reminder about a man called Mr. Must. I don't know if you've ever heard of Mr. Must. He was a lifelong pacifist who, during the Vietnam War, stood in front of the White House night after night for years, and he's just stood there holding a lighted candle. He was a one-person protest. And on a very rainy night, a reporter went up to him and said, "Mr. Must, do you really think that by standing here, day in, day out, holding a candle, that the policies of this country are really going to change?" And he said, "Oh, I don't do this to change the country. I do this so the country won't change me." We need some Mr. Musts at the moment, and I believe the church is asking you to self-scrutinize as to what the stories that we're sometimes picking up and acting out are doing to us, what corrosions are going on. The story you live in will be the story you live out. And imagination, although a lot of people think it's just something you make up, actually no. Imagination is the ability human beings have to join the dots, to see the whole, to step back and wonder what the horizon is. And sometimes we're so immersed in our small, detailed little worlds, we forget to do it. But the imagination allows us, as I say, to join those dots of our experience and to see the bigger picture. Our time is very short on this earth, and we need each other more than we can often admit. And I do think that at the moment, those of us who are calling on the human imagination to be more generous, to be less condemning, to be less ego-ridden, to redefine what it means to be great, and to ask what the countries are doing to us, it's all going to sound very revolutionary. And that's because it is. Revelation means re-evaluation, and it does mean some revolution. It is the song of Mary and of her Son, of life reseen, refreshed, redeemed, and it starts every time we come together and the story is retold and we simply pass round bread and we take some wine and we hear the words, "Remember." And we have to. And it's really urgent. Because as Evelyn Waugh once said, the saddest words in the whole English language are too late. Too late. Thank you.
Mark, thank you so much for such a deep, rich, moving, personal, challenging but hopeful talk. I think you, in all that you have said and done, have recalled us back and reminded us that at the heart of a good imagination is that which is given to us in God. And so I hope that, I'm sure I will, but I hope everyone else here will take that away and take that back into the world. Now we have some time for some questions before we go to wine, which is why I've come anyway. Would anyone like to start us off?
Mark, thank you so much. That was powerful, very moving, and on a personal note, very timely. I once went to a conference where one of the other guests at the conference, it was a conference to do with innovation, was wearing a badge which said, "I'm becoming the person I have the capacity to become." It was actually abbreviated, so it wasn't that big a badge. And we work with schools and with young people in encouraging their leadership and their imagination. And I guess my question is, what more should the church be doing to encourage that poeticness, if I can use that word, in our young people?
Young people, of course, have a very natural poetry in them. They are free users of language. And I'm always bowled over by some of the poems that the school children I meet have written. I mean, the important thing about poetry, of course, is that, and I know a lot of people find the word very scary. It's got bad memories of school and all that. There's even a word, metrophobia, which means fear of poetry. But actually, we're all capable of finding the words. And children often have that, but I've seen it also fairly recently in prison, young offenders institutes, where enormous work is done, fantastic work is done in helping prisoners come in touch with their inner life, expressing themselves in a way they've never done before. And of course, all that's happening there again is a different stories coming into view. Most of them have been told that they're useless. And now they're certainly being told they're not wanted. And all of a sudden, by finding these words with some help, quite often, the whole framework in which they are living is shifted. So poetry in prisons, poetry in hospices, poetry at weddings, poetry at funerals. We know that we need this sort of language when we're at a bit of a loss. And to help children just relish language. And there's a big problem, as you know, at the moment, about children not reading for pleasure. And the National Literacy Trust is doing a lot of work this year, particularly on this, and trying to teach. And I was talking to some teachers the other day about everybody's got a text for their exam, you know, oh, I read whatever, tick. But what teachers are having to do now with young people is convince them why they would ever want to pick up a book in the first place. Because they've got their phone. And if you could say, actually, you like trains, have you read this? And they read a book about a train and they get absolutely besotted. again, it's being pulled into the story. But a lot of people are not wanting the stories, they're just wanting the quick flick of a pick, scroll dooming and all that stuff. But I do think that schools and a lot of people as I say, in all these institutions, young offenders, prisons, so much good work is going on around use of words and how it develops your soul and your whole understanding of life, universe, and everything in it. So my advice is just to help people, help children encounter language and be playful with it, relish it. That's the other thing, of course, is church is often very stuffy with language. And we've lost our playfulness. The medievals were much more playful than we were. I'll give you one example. Easter Day in Bavaria. It was a tradition that the vicar would get up into the pulpit and before starting his sermon, he would just tell dirty jokes. And a bit like Frankie Howard or Kenneth Williams up in the pulpit, carry on up the confessional. And everybody would start laughing, and bishops didn't like it. They tried to stop it. But the clergy knew it worked. Everybody, was starting to laugh and nudge each other and have a bit of a giggle. And the theological truth was, laughter is the only way to celebrate the resurrection. That's the only real way to celebrate the day. So the vicar got you laughing. And another thing that used to happen on Pentecost is choir boys would often pour a bucket of water through a hole in the roof, and the person who got the wettest was known as the Pentecost bird in the village. And this was to remind you that the Holy Spirit isn't wooden. It's not like some sort of painting with a little dove on it. It drenches you. It changes you. You go out different than when you came in if the Holy Spirit has as it were, spilled its grace over you. So this sort of playfulness that the medieval Christians often had, we've become a bit dour, I think. And I would love to bring back a bit more playfulness.
You're lucky that I'm not going to be here at Pentecost this year.
I haven't really thought this question through, so apologies if I'm thinking on the hoof. We're in the middle of a week of prayer for Christian unity, and I spent 18 years working for the church and didn't see much unity, and I'm concerned that the divide is getting wider. What do you think the immediate and sort of long-term future for the church is if what you're talking about, a softly resilient sort of Christianity can't survive some of the onslaughts from other wings of the church? Sorry, that's not very well thought out, but I hope you get my drift.
Yeah, I think I do. Well, on the unity front, let's go back to imagination. I believe that the Christian faith is an invitation for you to use your imagination as to what it might be like not to be you, but to be the person next to you, or the person you just saw on the news. What might it be like to be them? Because they are also children of God, just like you are. So the Christian faith is saying, please don't stay with yourself. Please certainly don't make God just a big version of you. And don't project your own demons onto anybody else. But be imaginative. It's a wonderful thing to be when you can actually begin to understand something, and we never understand everything, something of what it might be to be them. and how that differs from my own life, or might be similar to it. Unity tends to happen when that breakthrough of generosity happens. What is perplexing is why Christians are so bad at it. There's no hate like Christian hate, and there's a lot of it. And I think it's because we prefer uniformity to unity. We want everybody to be the same. And anybody who isn't part of our club, we'll just laugh about, or we'll be cruel about, and we'll write another nasty little X comment about. That really perplexes me and concerns me. What do I think about the long-termness of all that? Well, I'd like to believe that, as I used to say to students, if you're going to go to hell, make sure you don't come back empty-handed. Right? If life takes you to a really bad place, and students always think they're having, a catastrophe, and of course what they're just going through is a bit of difficulty in life, but it's big for them. It's the first time they've gone through whatever it is. But don't come away empty-handed, learn from it. I think, to be honest, the church at the moment is going through such depths of disappointment, unimaginative bereavement, that the only way should be that we learn from it, we distill from it, and we become a rather different church out of it. And if you went to see Conclave, I think the best line in it was when some cardinal said, "The church is what we do next." We often talk about the church in the past, about being loyal to the past. Ultimately, the church is there to be loyal to the future. So the church should be defined on what we do next. And as long as I can believe that, I'm hopeful. And as a word that I'm trying to bring back into circulation single-handedly, and I preached about it at Christmas in Southwark Cathedral, and it's only appeared once in the Oxford English Dictionary ever, and it's respire. Nobody's ever heard of it. But respire meant fresh hope, and it developed out of recovering from despair. So the word eventually became respair, recovery from despair, fresh hope. And I believe in that as a person of faith. I do believe in that. But often you go through deaths and tombs and cemeteries of the soul in order to come out somewhat distilled, defrosted. And I can't but believe that this is what's happening to the church at the moment. And I will remain hopeful that we can emerge with some freshness to us. On a good day.
Yeah, you hold it. Oh, evening, sir. What age was your mother when you caught up with her?
Oh.
Yeah.
Late 70s. And she picked the moment because her dementia was very fast, and now she doesn't know anybody. So her story did disappear, which is the miracle of the story, is she picked exactly the right moment to tell me. But yeah, she's now early 80s, mid-80s. Yeah. And she was late 70s, I think.
Slightly holding the microphone. Why is it that you think we as human beings need things like ritual and need things like symbol to be able to communicate and to relate to one another?
Well, we are meaning makers, aren't we? We're storytellers. We self-dramatize. We're always the sort of centre of our universe, and it's nice when we learn not to be, and that moment when you're out on the country walk and you suddenly go, oh, look at that, that's fantastic. And you suddenly see that you're not the centre. Those are great moments, and they come like a breath of fresh air. But I think we do need to capture the things that matter, that move us, that are transcendent, or they've got a sense of, they are beyond talking about easily. And if you can't talk about things easily, you've got to communicate and express in different ways. And for some people that will mean getting out the paint box, and some will start dancing, and some will go to church, and some will sing. And these are all the human ways in which we're celebrating the fact that life demands more of us than mere literalisms. We need the richness of artistic expression and exploration. And the human in us is calling out for it. And of course, the first thing that fascists and controllers, dictators will do is to stop the arts. And will start repeating the lie that you then have to keep repeating in order that you live in their story. But the arts will break out of that, take you on a different journey. So it's worrying to a controller.
Seems that shyness has got the better of everybody here. And there's going to be more chance to talk to Mark at the back over refreshments, so please do join us. Mark, thank you again so much for travelling out. I know you have an extremely busy life and you are much in demand for this sort of thing, and so it's a real honour for us to have you here just for this moment. You've inspired us and moved us all. Can we give Mark another big round of applause?